The shuttle descended through clouds of silver mist toward the moonworld of Ethkaros. And Sergeant Marcus Cole watched the alien palace grow larger through the viewport window. He had seen many strange things during his 10 years of military service, but nothing prepared him for the crystalline towers that rose from the purple landscape like frozen flames reaching toward the stars. The Valanthi sovereignty had ruled this corner of the galaxy for over 12,000 years, and their palace reflected that ancient power in every gleaming surface. Marcus checked his uniform one more time and found everything in perfect order. Though he knew it would not matter to the aliens waiting below, humanity had joined the Galactic Compact only 5 years ago, and most species still viewed humans as primitive newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. The people knew stars. The people knew still viewed humans as primitive newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. The Valanthi were perhaps the worst in this regard. Considering themselves the most advanced telepathic species in known space, they could read the minds of almost every sentient creature they encountered, which made them confident in their superiority over all others. The shuttle landed with a soft hum, and Marcus stepped out onto a platform made of something that looked like glass but felt warm beneath his boots. A group of Valanthi guards stood waiting for him, their tall insectoid bodies covered in natural armor that shimmered with soft blue light. Each of them stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and large eyes that reflected everything around them like living mirrors. Commander Velkarix stepped forward, and Marcus could immediately sense the contempt radiating from the alien officer. "You are the human," Velkarix said, and his voice carried a musical quality that did nothing to hide his disdain. "Sergeant Marcus Cole, reporting for duty as assigned by the Galactic Compact." Marcus replied with a crisp salute. Velkarix made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been an insult in his native language. "We did not request a human guard, and we do not want one," the commander said plainly. "But the Compact insists on these political gestures. So here you are." Marcus kept his face neutral and his posture straight, refusing to show any reaction to the hostile welcome. "I am here to serve Queen Silathara to the best of my ability," he said simply. "Your ability," Velkarix repeated. And this time several of the other guards made that same strange sound. "Humans cannot even shield their thoughts properly, and your minds are so chaotic that reading them gives us headaches, which is perhaps the only reason you are not completely transparent to us." Marcus had been briefed on this before leaving Earth, and he understood that humans occupied a unique position among galactic species. Most aliens could be read like open books by Valanthi telepaths, but human minds operated differently, producing what the Valanthi called mental noise that made clear reading nearly impossible. Some humans had wondered if this might be an advantage, but the Valanthi simply viewed it as proof that human brains were poorly organized and primitive. "Follow me," Velkarix commanded, turning without waiting for a response. "I will show you to your quarters and explain your ceremonial duties." Marcus followed the commander through corridors that seemed to be carved from single pieces of crystal, and everywhere he looked, he saw beauty that took his breath away. But he also noticed other things as they walked through the palace, and his trained eyes caught details that had nothing to do with beauty. He saw the placement of guards at each intersection, the way certain doors were reinforced while others stood open, and the patterns of movement among the servants they passed. These observations were automatic for Marcus, burned into his mind by years of combat experience and survival in dangerous situations. His assignment to this post had not been a reward for good service, but rather a punishment dressed up as an honor. 6 months ago, Marcus had disobeyed a direct order from Admiral Chun during a border conflict with pirates. The admiral had commanded him to hold position while civilians were being slaughtered in a nearby settlement. But Marcus had broken ranks and led his squad to save them. They had rescued over 200 people that day. But Admiral Chun had been furious about the breach of orders instead of a court-martial that might have made the admiral look bad. Marcus had been promoted to this diplomatic assignment far from any real military action. The message was clear enough. And Marcus understood that he had been sent here to be forgotten. Valerics stopped before a small room that contained a bed, a desk, and nothing else of comfort or decoration. "These are your quarters," the commander announced. "You will stand guard outside the Queen's chambers during the third shift each day, and you will attend formal functions as a symbol of human participation in the compact. Though you will not speak unless spoken to, and you will not approach Her Majesty under any circumstances." "Understood," Marcus said. Stepping into the sparse room, "I doubt that you do understand," Valerics replied. "But it does not matter, because you are here for appearance only, and no one expects anything real from you." The commander left without another word, and Marcus stood alone in his small room on an alien world surrounded by people who saw him as less than nothing. He unpacked his few belongings and placed a photograph of his family on the desk. Looking at the faces of his parents and his younger sister back on Earth, they had been so proud when he joined the military, believing that he would help humanity earn its place among the stars. Now he stood in a crystal palace as a political prop. Dismissed before he had even begun, but Marcus had never been the type to feel sorry for himself. And he had learned long ago that circumstances did not define a person. What mattered was how you responded to those circumstances. And Marcus intended to do his duty with excellence, regardless of how anyone else viewed him. He spent the rest of that first day exploring every part of the palace that he was allowed to access, memorizing layouts and learning the rhythms of daily life. The Volante servants avoided him as if he carried some kind of disease. But he did not let their behavior affect his focus. When the third shift came, Marcus took his position outside the Queen's chambers with perfect military precision. The crystal doors before him were carved with images of Volante history stretching back thousands of years, and he studied them while he stood watch hours past in silence. And no one came or went through those magnificent doors. Just before his shift ended, the doors opened, and Queen Silithara herself emerged into the corridor. Marcus had seen images of her during his briefings, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of her presence. She stood 7 feet tall, and her natural armor glowed with soft golden light that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her eyes were deep purple, and they held an intelligence that made Marcus feel like a child standing before an ancient teacher. "You are the human," she said, and her voice was like music given form. "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, keeping his eyes forward as protocol demanded. The Queen studied him for a long moment, and he could feel something brushing against the edges of his mind like gentle fingers trying to find a door. "Your thoughts are strange," she said finally, like trying to hear a single voice in a crowded room full of shouting. "And I find I cannot read you clearly at all. I have been told this is common with humans." "Your Majesty, common perhaps, but still unpleasant," Silithara replied. "I do not know what to make of a creature whose mind I cannot touch, and I am not certain I like having such a creature standing outside my door. I mean you no harm." "Your Majesty," Marcus said quietly, "I am here only to serve." The Queen made a soft sound that might have been amusement or might have been dismissal. "We shall see what you are here for." "Human," she said, and then she walked away down the crystal corridor, leaving Marcus alone once more. He watched her go and felt something settle in his chest, a quiet determination that had carried him through every difficult moment of his life. They did not want him here, and they did not respect him. But Marcus Cole had never needed anyone's approval to do what was right. He would stand his watch and do his duty. And perhaps someday they would understand that humans had value beyond what could be read in their minds. The palace grew quiet around him as the night cycle began, and Marcus stood alone in the darkness. A single human among thousands of aliens who saw him as nothing, but he was patient and he was watchful. And he knew that sometimes the greatest changes began in the smallest moments. Somewhere in this beautiful palace, something was wrong. And Marcus could feel it in his bones, even if he could not yet name. I did not know what the future would bring. But he was ready for whatever came, because that was what soldiers did. They stood watch in the darkness and waited for the dawn. 3 months passed on the moon world of HFY, and Marcus Cole became a silent shadow in the Crystal Palace. The Lanthi had grown so accustomed to ignoring him that most acted as if he did not exist at all, walking past him without a glance or speaking freely in his presence as if he were furniture. This suited Marcus perfectly, because invisible people could see things that others missed. He had used his time well, learning the Velanthi language until he could understand every word spoken around him, studying their customs until he knew their traditions better than some of the younger courtiers, and watching their body language until he could read their emotions without any telepathic ability at all. The Velanthi relied so heavily on their mind-reading powers that they had forgotten how much information their bodies revealed. A slight tremor in their lower arms meant nervousness. A dimming of their natural glow indicated stress, and rapid blinking of their secondary eyes showed deception. Marcus had cataloged dozens of these small tells, creating a mental database that let him understand the Velanthi almost as well as they understood each other. Today, he stood at his usual post during a council meeting, positioned near the back of the great chamber where the queen met with her advisors. 12 lords and ladies of the Velanthi nobility sat in a semicircle before Silthar, discussing matters of trade and diplomacy that would affect billions of lives. Across multiple star systems, Marcus listened to everything while appearing to stare at nothing, his face blank and his posture relaxed. The hegemony of Seer has proposed a new trade agreement, announced Lord Kethvarin, a tall Velanthi whose armor was marked with the deep blue patterns of an ancient bloodline. They wish to exchange mineral rights in the outer territories for access to our medical technologies. Marcus shifted his attention to Kethvarin without moving his eyes, and something immediately felt wrong. The Lord's glow had dimmed slightly when he mentioned the hegemony, and his lower left arm showed the faintest tremor as he spoke. "What are your thoughts on this proposal, Lord Kethvarin?" Queen Salazar asked from her throne of living crystal. "I believe it merits serious consideration." "Your Majesty," Kethvarin replied smoothly, "the hegemony has been our rival for centuries, but perhaps it is time to build bridges rather than walls." There it was again, that slight dimming, that tiny tremor. And now Marcus noticed that Kethvarin's secondary eyes blinked 3 times in rapid succession. The Lord was lying, or at least hiding something significant, and Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He watched Kethvarin throughout the rest of the meeting, noting every small reaction and filing it away in his memory. When the council ended and the nobles departed, Marcus remained at his post until his shift was complete. That evening, he made his way to Commander Velkarik's office and requested an audience. The commander kept him waiting for an hour before finally allowing him entry, and the look on Velkarik's face made clear how unwelcome this visit was. "What do you want, human?" Velkarix demanded without any pretense of courtesy. "I wish to report a concern about Lord Kethvarin," Marcus said calmly. "During today's council meeting, I observed several signs that suggested he was being deceptive about the hegemony trade proposal." Velkarix stared at him for a long moment before making that sound that passed for Velanthi laughter. "You observe signs of deception," the commander repeated slowly. "You, a human who cannot read minds, believe you detected something that Her Majesty and all 12 council members missed. I understand how it sounds, Commander, but I am trained to notice these things." And Lord Cathvarin displayed multiple indicators of stress and dishonesty when discussing the hegemony. Lord Cathvarin has served the crown for over 400 years, Velcoric said, his voice growing cold. His family has been loyal to the sovereignty since before your species learned to make fire. And you dare to accuse him based on what? Because he blinked too much? I am not making an accusation, Commander. I am simply reporting an observation that I believe warrants investigation. Velcoric rose from his seat and towered over Marcus, his glow intensifying with anger. Listen to me carefully, human, because I will only say this once. The commander hissed. You are here as a political decoration. Nothing more, and your observations are worthless. Your concerns are meaningless, and your presence is barely tolerated. So do not come to me again with your primitive suspicions about matters you cannot possibly understand. Marcus held his ground and kept his voice steady. I am simply doing my duty as I see it. Commander, your duty is to stand where you are told and stay quiet, Velcoric snapped. Now get out of my office and do not waste my time again. Marcus left without another word. But he did not abandon his concerns over the following days. He began to investigate on his own, carefully and quietly, using the invisibility that the Volanthi had granted him by ignoring his existence. He tracked Lord Cathvaris's movements through the palace, noting when he arrived and departed, which servants attended him, and who he spoke with in the corridors one evening, while Marcus walked through a lesser-used section of the palace. He encountered a young Volanthi servant struggling to carry a heavy load of crystal vessels. Without thinking, he stepped forward and helped her balance the load before it could fall. The servant looked up at him with surprise, her large eyes wide with shock. You are the human, she said, stating the obvious as if she could not quite believe it. I am, Marcus replied simply. Are you all right? I am fine, thank you, she said. And then she paused as if uncertain what to do next. My name is Tila, and I work in the lower kitchens. I am Marcus Cole, he said. It is good to meet you, Tila. The young servant studied him with open curiosity, none of the contempt he had grown used to showing in her expression. You are different from what I expected, she said finally. The others say humans are loud and crude, but you seem quiet and kind. I have been called many things, but I will happily accept quiet and kind. Tila made a soft sound that Marcus recognized as genuine laughter, and he found himself smiling in return over the following weeks. Marcus and Tila developed an unlikely friendship, meeting occasionally in the quieter parts of the palace to talk. She was young by Volanthi standards, barely 60 years old, and she had not yet developed the rigid attitudes of her elders. Through Tila, Marcus learned the palace gossip that never reached the council chambers, and what he learned troubled him deeply. Lord Cathvarin has been acting strangely for months, Tila confided one evening. The servants have noticed, even if the nobles have not. Strangely how? Marcus asked carefully. He has been receiving private messages from off-world, and he dismisses his servants whenever these messages arrive, which is very unusual for a lord of his standing. Do you know where these messages come from? Tila shook her head, her glow dimming slightly with nervousness. I should not be telling you any of this, but there are rumors among the servants that Lord Cathvarin has been in contact with the hegemony of Seer directly, outside of official channels. Marcus felt his suspicions crystallize into something harder and more dangerous. Tila, this is important, he said quietly. Has anyone else reported these concerns? Who would we report them to? She asked sadly. We are servants, and Lord Cathvarin is one of the most powerful nobles in the sovereignty, and no one would believe us even if we did speak up. That night, Marcus lay awake in his small room, staring at the ceiling and turning the pieces over in his mind. Lord Cathvarin was hiding something connected to the hegemony of Seer, the ancient enemy of the Volanthi sovereignty. The Feast of Eternal Stars was approaching in 1 week, the most sacred celebration in Volanti culture, when the Queen would be surrounded by thousands of guests and countless opportunities for disaster. Marcus did not know exactly what Kethvarin was planning, but every instinct he possessed screamed that danger was approaching. Had tried to warn Commander Velcorix and been dismissed as a primitive fool with worthless observations, but Marcus had not survived 10 years as a soldier by ignoring his instincts. And he knew that sometimes the only way forward was to take risks that others would call impossible. The Feast of Eternal Stars was coming, and somewhere in this beautiful palace, a traitor was preparing to strike. Marcus did not know how he would stop it, but he knew that he had to try, because that was who he was, the human who watched when others looked away, who noticed when others ignored, and who acted when others did nothing. He would find the truth, and he would protect the Queen, even if it cost him everything. The night before the Feast of Eternal Stars, Marcus Cole discovered the truth he had been searching for, and it was worse than anything he had imagined. He had spent days following Lord Kethvarin's movements, mapping his contacts and piecing together fragments of information from servant gossip and his own observations. Tonight, fate had finally handed him the proof he needed. Marcus had been walking through a corridor near the lower levels of the palace when he heard voices coming from behind a partially closed door. He recognized Lord Kethvarin's musical tones immediately, and he pressed himself against the wall to listen. The toxin will be delivered in the cup of starlight during tomorrow's ceremony, Kethvarin was saying to someone Marcus could not see. It is completely undetectable to Volanti senses, and by the time anyone realizes what has happened, the Queen will be dead. A cold voice responded through what sounded like a communication device, and Marcus recognized the harsh accent of the hegemony of Seer. And you are certain this substance will work on a Volanti of her age and power? The hegemony scientists assured me it would work on any carbon-based life form, Kethvarin replied. Once she drinks from the cup, the toxin will attack her neural pathways within seconds, and death will follow within minutes. And then you will claim the regency as the highest-ranking noble in the succession. That is the plan, Kethvarin confirmed. And once I control the sovereignty, our alliance with the hegemony will reshape the balance of power in this entire sector of the galaxy. Marcus heard enough, and he slipped away as quietly as he had come, his heart pounding with the weight of what he had learned. Lord Kethvarin intended to murder Queen Silathara during the most sacred ceremony in Volanti culture, and no one except Marcus knew the truth. He went directly to Commander Velcorix's office, knowing that he had to try one more time despite their previous encounter. The commander was still working despite the late hour, and he looked up with undisguised irritation when Marcus entered. I told you never to waste my time again. Human, Commander, I have direct evidence of a plot to assassinate the Queen, Marcus said urgently. Lord Kethvarin plans to poison her during tomorrow's ceremony using a toxin hidden in the cup of starlight. Velcorix rose slowly from his seat, and his glow pulsed with what might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely. You are accusing a noble lord of treason based on what evidence? I overheard him speaking with a hegemony contact less than an hour ago, Marcus explained quickly. He confirmed the entire plan, including the method and the timing. You overheard him, Velcorix repeated coldly. A human who cannot be telepathically verified claims to have overheard a conversation that no one else witnessed, and you expect me to act on this? Commander, please, I know what I heard. And the Queen's life is in danger. Velcorix moved around his desk and stood directly in front of Marcus, his tall frame casting a shadow over the human soldier. What I see is a primitive creature desperate for attention, the commander said softly. You have been ignored and dismissed since you arrived here, and now you fabricate a conspiracy to make yourself seem important. That is not what this is, Marcus insisted. I have no reason to lie about something like this. You have every reason to lie, Velcorix countered. Your species craves recognition, and you cannot stand being treated as the insignificant decoration that you are. So you invent threats that only you can see and plots that only you can stop. Commander, if I am wrong, I will accept any punishment you choose, but please, at least investigate before the ceremony tomorrow. Velcorix studied him for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. I will make one thing perfectly clear, the commander said finally. If you approach the Queen, if you speak to any member of the court about these accusations, if you disrupt the Feast of Eternal Stars in any way, I will have you arrested and executed for sedition. And no one in the galaxy will question my decision because you are nothing. And your death will mean nothing. Marcus felt the weight of that threat settle over him like a physical force. But he did not back down. I understand, Commander, but I cannot ignore what I know to be true. Then you are a fool, Velcorix said. And fools die young, even among humans. Now get out of my sight. Marcus left the commander's office knowing that he had only one option remaining. An option that would almost certainly cost him his life. He spent the rest of the night preparing, reviewing everything he knew and planning for every possibility he could imagine when dawn broke over Ethkaros, painting the crystal towers in shades of gold and rose. Marcus made his decision. He would go directly to the Queen. The morning passed in a blur of activity as the palace prepared for the Feast of Eternal Stars. Thousands of guests began arriving from across the sovereignty, filling the great halls with color and music and the soft glow of Volanti bioluminescence. Marcus took his position near the Pandava Queen's chambers as he always did. But today, he watched for his opportunity. Instead of simply standing guard, it came in the early afternoon. When Queen Silithara emerged from her chambers to inspect the preparations for the evening ceremony, Marcus stepped forward, directly into her path, and every Volanti guard in the corridor immediately raised their weapons. Human, step back immediately, the lead guard commanded. You are violating every protocol of the royal court. Your Majesty, I must speak with you, Marcus said, keeping his eyes fixed on the Queen, despite the weapons pointed at his chest. It is a matter of life and death. Silithara raised one hand, and her guards held their position without firing. You are bold. Human, she said, and her voice carried neither anger nor curiosity. Only a cool assessment, or perhaps you are simply foolish. Perhaps both. Your Majesty, but I have information that you must hear, and no one else will listen to me. The Queen studied him with those deep purple eyes. And once again, Marcus felt the gentle pressure against the edges of his mind as she tried to read his thoughts. Your mind remains close to me, she said finally. I cannot tell if you speak truth or madness. Then let me speak, and you can judge for yourself. Silithara was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the tension radiating from every guard in the corridor. Very well, she said at last. You have 5 minutes to explain yourself, and if I find your words to be lies or foolishness, you will be executed before the feast begins. She led him to a small private chamber, dismissing her guards despite their protests and closing the door behind them. Speak, she commanded. Marcus told her everything, starting with his observations of Lord Kethverin at the council meeting 3 months ago, and ending with the conversation he had overheard the previous night. He presented every piece of evidence, every connection, every logical conclusion he had drawn. The Queen listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Marcus finished, silence filled the chamber like water filling a vessel. You are asking me to believe that a lord who has served my family for 4 centuries is planning to murder me, Silithara said finally. I am asking you to consider the possibility, Your Majesty, and to take precautions. Lord Cathvarin could read your accusations in the minds of everyone present, she pointed out. If what you say is true, he will know that he has been discovered. His telepathy cannot reach me, Marcus reminded her. My mind is closed even to you, which means he has no way of knowing what I have told you unless someone else reveals it. The Queen fell silent again, and Marcus watched her process the information. Why do you care about my survival? She asked unexpectedly. I have shown you no kindness, and my people have treated you with contempt since you arrived. So why would you risk your life to warn me? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering, because it is the right thing to do. He said simply, I did not choose to be assigned here, but I chose to take my duty seriously, and my duty is to protect you. Regardless of how I am treated, something shifted in the Queen's expression, a softening that Marcus had never seen before. You are a strange creature. Human, she said quietly. I cannot read your thoughts, but I find that I believe your words. She was silent for another long moment before speaking again. I will have Lord Cathvarin quietly investigated before the ceremony, and I will order the Cup of Starlight to be tested for foreign substances. Thank you. Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet, Silithara said. If your accusations prove false, you will still be executed for this breach of protocol. I understand, Marcus replied. But if I am right, your life will be saved, and that is worth any price. The Queen studied him one final time, and something passed between them that transcended words. You will stand at my side during the feast tonight, she announced. If Cathvarin is indeed a traitor, I want you where I can see you. Marcus bowed deeply. As you command. Your Majesty. He left the chamber, knowing that he had done everything he could. And now the fate of the Queen, and perhaps the entire sovereignty, rested in hands other than his own. The Feast of Eternal Stars would begin in a few hours, and by the time it ended, Marcus would either be vindicated or dead. He found that he was at peace with either outcome, because he had followed his conscience and done what he believed was right. That was all any soldier could ask of themselves. The grand celebration hall blazed with light as thousands of Volanthi gathered for the Feast of Eternal Stars, the most sacred ceremony in their 12,000-year history. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that stretched 50 meters above the floor, each one containing a captured star fragment that cast prismatic rainbows across the assembled crowds. Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the raised platform where Queen Silithara sat upon her throne of living crystal. Feeling incredibly small among so many alien beings, he was the only human in the entire hall, and countless eyes flickered toward him with confusion or contempt whenever they noticed his presence, but Marcus ignored them all, focusing every ounce of his attention on scanning the crowd for signs of danger. The Queen had ordered a quiet investigation of Lord Cathvarin, but the results had been inconclusive. The Cup of Starlight had been tested and found clean of any toxins, which had made Commander Velcarix openly sneer at Marcus from across the hall. Perhaps he had been wrong, Marcus thought. Perhaps his instincts had finally failed him. But even as that doubt crossed his mind, something in his gut told him that the danger was still real. The ceremony began with ancient prayers, spoken in a language older than human civilization, and the assembled Volanthi bowed their heads in reverence. Queen Silithara rose from her throne and spoke words of blessing over her people, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Marcus watched Lord Cathvarin standing among the other nobles, and he noticed that the Lord's glow was slightly brighter than usual, his posture slightly more rigid. Those were signs of anticipation, Marcus realized, not the relaxed demeanor of someone whose plans had failed. The toxin was not in the cup yet. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as understanding dawned on him. Cathvarin must have planned to add the poison at the last moment, perhaps from a hidden container on his person. When he presented the cup of starlight to the queen, the traditional ceremony required each high noble to approach the throne in order of rank and offer a blessing. And Kethvarin would be among the first to do so. Marcus caught the queen's eye and gave a small shake of his head, trying to communicate his concern without words. Silthara's expression remained neutral, but he saw her give the slightest nod of acknowledgement. The procession of nobles began, each one approaching the throne to speak their blessing and receive the queen's touch upon their brow. Marcus watched each interaction with desperate intensity, counting down the moments until Kethvarin's turn arrived. 3 nobles remained, then 2, then 1. And then Lord Kethvarin himself stepped forward with the ceremonial cup of starlight cradled in his upper arms. The cup was a magnificent object, carved from a single piece of crystal that had been blessed by every queen for the past 8,000 years. As Kethvarin walked toward the throne, Marcus saw his lower right hand move almost imperceptibly toward a hidden pocket in his robes. This was it, the moment when Kethvarin would add the toxin to the cup. Marcus had perhaps 3 seconds to act before the poison was delivered, and the queen drank her own death. He did not hesitate, because hesitation meant death. Marcus stepped forward, directly into Kethvarin's path, and reached out to intercept the cup of starlight before it could be offered to the queen. Gasps echoed through the hall as thousands of Volanthi witnessed a human daring to interrupt the most sacred ceremony of their culture. What is the meaning of this outrage? Kethvarin demanded, his voice rising with seemingly righteous anger. Marcus did not answer, because words would take too long and would convince no one. Instead, he raised the cup of starlight to his own lips and drank deeply. The liquid was sweet at first, with a taste like honey and starlight, but then something else bloomed across his tongue. Something bitter and wrong. The poison hit his system like a wave of fire, and Marcus felt his legs buckle beneath him as every nerve in his body screamed in agony. He collapsed to the floor of the platform, the cup falling from his hands and shattering against the crystal. And his vision began to blur as convulsions racked his body. Screams filled the hall as the assembled Volanthi realized what was happening, and guards rushed forward with weapons drawn through the haze of pain. Marcus heard Queen Silithara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Seize Lord Kethvarin immediately. Kethvarin tried to run, but a dozen guards were upon him before he could take 3 steps, and they forced him to his knees before the throne. Your Majesty, this is madness, Kethvarin protested. The human has clearly poisoned himself to frame me for some imagined crime. Then you will not object to a telepathic interrogation, Silithara said coldly. Open your mind to me, Kethvarin, and prove your innocence. Marcus could barely see through the pain that consumed his body, but he saw Kethvarin's expression change from outrage to terror as the queen's psychic power pressed against his mental defenses. No, Kethvarin screamed. You cannot. I am a lord of the realm. I have rights. You have the right to truth, Silithara replied, and her voice carried an edge of something ancient and terrible. And I will have it. The telepathic interrogation lasted only moments, but it revealed everything. The conspiracy with the hegemony of Seer, the plan to assassinate the queen, the poison designed to be undetectable to Volanthi senses, but devastating to their biology. All of it poured from Kethvarin's mind like water from a broken vessel. You would have murdered me and sold our people to our enemies, Silithara said, and her voice was quiet with a fury that Marcus had never heard. You would have ended 12,000 years of our sovereignty for personal power. The sovereignty is weak, Kethvarin spat, abandoning all pretense now that his guilt was exposed. The hegemony would have made us strong. But you were too blind to see it. Take him away, the queen commanded. He will face judgment for his treason. Guards dragged the screaming lord from the hall. And then Silithara turned her attention to Marcus, who still lay convulsing on the floor. Medical teams to the platform now, she ordered. Save this human if you can. Marcus felt hands upon him, felt the cold press of alien medical devices against his skin, and heard voices speaking in rapid Volanthi about toxicity levels and neural damage. The pain was receding, but so was everything else, and Marcus felt himself sinking into a darkness that seemed to have no end. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was the Queen herself, kneeling beside him on the cold crystal floor. No Volanthi monarch had ever knelt before an off-worlder in all of recorded history. But Silithara did not seem to care about history in that moment. "You impossible creature," she whispered, and her voice carried something that might have been wonder and might have been grief. "Why did you do this?" Marcus tried to answer, tried to explain that it was simply the right thing to do. But the words would not come. He managed only 2 words before the darkness claimed him completely. "My duty," he breathed. And then there was nothing. The medical teams worked through the night, fighting to save the life of the human who had saved their queen. The poison had been designed to kill Volanthi instantly. But human biology was different in ways the hegemony scientists had not anticipated, where the toxin would have destroyed Volanthi neural pathways in seconds. It instead triggered a massive inflammatory response in Marcus's human brain. This was nearly as deadly, but it was slower. And slower meant that there was time for the Volanthi doctors to act. They used every technique their advanced medical science could provide, filtering his blood, suppressing the inflammation, and repairing the damage one cell at a time. Queen Silithara remained in the medical chamber throughout the night, refusing to leave despite the protests of her advisors. "He drank poison for me," she said simply. "The least I can do is remain while others fight to save him." Commander Velkarix arrived at some point during the night, and he stood in the doorway of the medical chamber with an expression that Marcus would have enjoyed seeing if he had been conscious to witness it. "I was wrong about him," Velkarix admitted quietly, the words clearly costing him something. "Yes," Silithara agreed. "You were. If he survives, I will apologize to him personally." "If he survives, you will do much more than apologize," the Queen replied. "But that conversation can wait." Dawn came over Ethkaros, and the medical teams finally stepped back from their patient. "He will live," the head physician announced, and exhaustion colored every word. His human physiology reacted to the toxin differently than ours would have. And this difference is what saved him. "When will he wake?" Silithara asked. "We do not know, Your Majesty. It could be hours or days or weeks, as his brain needs time to heal from the trauma." The Queen nodded and took a seat beside the bed where Marcus lay, his breathing steady but his eyes closed. "Then I will wait," she said, "for as long as it takes," and wait she did. As the news of the human hero spread across the sovereignty and then beyond, reaching every corner of the Galactic Compact, the story seemed almost too strange to be true. A human guard drinking poison meant for an alien queen, a primitive species proving itself in the most dramatic way possible. But the truth was undeniable, recorded by thousands of witnesses and broadcast across countless worlds. Humanity had proven itself in a single act of selfless courage, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Marcus Cole opened his eyes to find soft golden light surrounding him and the face of an alien queen hovering above. "You are awake," Silithara said, and something in her voice carried a warmth that Marcus had never heard before. "We were beginning to wonder if you would ever return to us." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper and his body felt like it had been used as a punching bag by giants. "How long?" He managed to croak. 12 days, the Queen replied. "Your human body fought hard to survive, and in the end, it won." 12 days, Marcus thought, processing that information slowly through a brain that still felt wrapped in fog. "Kethvarin?" he asked. "Executed 3 days ago." along with 7 co-conspirators we discovered during the investigation, Silithara answered. The hegemony of Seer has been formally sanctioned by the Galactic Compact for their involvement, and they have lost significant standing among the major powers. Marcus nodded weakly, satisfied that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The sovereignty is safe then, because of you, the Queen said. A human who had every reason to hate us saved us from destruction, and no one who witnessed that moment will ever forget it. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his bed, unused to praise and uncertain how to respond to it. I was just doing my job. Your Majesty. Silithar made that soft sound that Marcus had learned was Volanti laughter. And for the first time, it seemed genuinely warm rather than dismissive. You keep saying that, but I do not believe any job description requires drinking poison for people who treat you poorly. Maybe not, Marcus admitted, but it still seemed like the right thing to do. The Queen was silent for a moment, studying him with those deep purple eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. I have lived for over 2,000 years, she said finally, and in all that time, I have learned to rely on my telepathic abilities to judge the hearts of those around me. But you are different, Marcus Cole, and I find that I cannot read your mind no matter how hard I try. I have been told this is frustrating for your kind, Marcus said. It was at first, Silithara agreed. But I have come to realize that your unreadable mind is perhaps your greatest gift, because it forced me to judge you by your actions rather than your thoughts. And your actions have spoken louder than any telepathic impression ever could. She reached out and placed one of her hands upon his, and Marcus felt the warmth of her touch, even through the alien texture of her skin. I misjudged you and your entire species, she continued. We dismissed humans as primitive and chaotic because your minds were noisy and unstructured. But perhaps that chaos is actually freedom. And perhaps that noise is actually passion. Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he simply squeezed her hand gently. The ceremony of recognition will take place in 2 weeks. Once you have fully recovered, Silithara announced, the entire sovereignty will witness as I grant you the title of Velashor, he who stands in shadow. And this honor has never before been given to anyone outside our species. I do not need titles or recognition. Your Majesty, Marcus protested weakly. Perhaps not, the Queen replied. But my people need to see that honor can transcend species. And that courage is not limited to those with ancient bloodlines. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus recovered his strength, and the palace that had once been cold to him transformed into something almost welcoming. Servants who had avoided his eyes now nodded respectfully when they passed. Guards who had sneered at his presence now saluted him as a fellow warrior. And even Commander Velcorix came to his chambers to deliver the apology he had promised. I was wrong about you, the commander said stiffly, and Marcus could see how much those words cost him. I judge you by your species rather than your character, and I nearly allowed my prejudice to cost us our queen. You are not alone in your prejudice, Commander. Marcus replied graciously. Most of the galaxy views humans the same way you did. Most of the galaxy is wrong then, Velcorix said, and I will not make that mistake again. The ceremony of recognition was held in the same grand celebration, all where Marcus had drunk the poisoned cup. And this time, there were no enemies lurking in the crowd. Instead, there were only witnesses. Thousands of Volanti gathered to honor a human who had proven himself worthy of their respect. Queen Silithara stood before her throne, resplendent in ceremonial robes that caught the light of 100 captured stars. Citizens of the sovereignty, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. We gathered today to honor one who saved our civilization through an act of selfless courage. She gestured for Marcus to approach, and he walked forward on legs that still trembled slightly from his ordeal. Sergeant Marcus Cole came to us as a political gesture. assigned to serve as a symbol of human participation in the Galactic Compact. Silithara continued, "We did not want him here. We did not respect him. And we treated him as something less than a person." The chamber was utterly silent as the Queen spoke. Every Volanthi present, absorbing her words, but Marcus Cole did not respond to our contempt with anger or resentment. She said, "Instead, he responded with duty. And when he discovered a plot against my life, he pursued the truth despite being dismissed and threatened at every turn." Silithara paused and looked directly at Marcus. When the moment of crisis came, "This human did not hesitate," she declared. "He drank poison meant for me without knowing if his body could survive it. And he did this for a queen and a people who had shown him nothing but coldness." The Queen raised her hand, and an attendant brought forward a medallion carved from the same living crystal as her throne. "I hereby name Marcus Cole as Velisher, he who stands in shadow, an honor never before granted to anyone not of Volanthi blood," Silithara announced as she placed the medallion around his neck. "From this day forward, he stands as my personal guardian, not as a symbol, but as a true protector of the sovereignty." The chamber erupted in applause and the musical humming that Volanthi used to express approval. And Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes despite himself, but the Queen was not finished. "Let this moment serve as a lesson to us all," she continued once the applause had faded. "We have long prided ourselves on our telepathic abilities, believing that we could judge others by reading their minds. But this human reminded us that true character is revealed through action, not thought." She turned to address the crowd directly. "Humans cannot be read like other species, and we dismiss them as primitive because of this difference," Silithara said. "But perhaps their unreadable minds are actually a form of protection, forcing us to judge them by what they do rather than what they think, and by that measure, Marcus Cole has proven himself to be among the noblest souls I have ever encountered." In the weeks that followed, Marcus settled into his new role as the Queen's personal guardian. He attended council meetings, accompanied her on diplomatic missions, and stood at her side during ceremonies, both grand and small. His presence became a constant reminder to the Volanthi that humanity had earned its place among the stars through courage rather than conquest. Story of the human who saved the Queen spread far beyond the sovereignty, reaching every corner of the Galactic Compact. Other species began to look at humans differently, no longer seeing them as primitive newcomers, but as beings capable of remarkable heroism. One evening, as Marcus stood guard outside the Queen's chambers, a young Volanthi child approached him. The child was perhaps 7 years old by Volanthi standards, which meant she was barely old enough to have formed the prejudices of her elders. "You are the human hero," she said, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. "My parents told me the story of how you saved the Queen." Marcus knelt down to meet her gaze. Smiling gently, "I am just a human," he said, "and I did what anyone would have done in my place. My teachers say that humans cannot read minds like we can." The child continued, "They say your thoughts are too noisy and confused." "So how did you know what was right?" Marcus considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer might shape how this young Volanthi viewed humans for the rest of her very long life. "We listen," he said finally, "not to thoughts, but to something deeper. And some humans call it instinct. Others call it conscience. But whatever the name, it guides us to do what is right even when no one is watching, and even when no one will know." The child tilted her head, processing his words with the intense concentration of the very young. "Can you teach me to listen like that?" she asked. Marcus smiled and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I think you already know how," he said. "You just have to trust yourself to hear it." The child nodded solemnly and then ran off to rejoin her parents. Leaving Marcus alone in the corridor, he returned to his post, standing straight and proud in his new position of honor. far away, on a small blue planet called Earth. The news of his heroism had reached his family. His parents had wept with pride, and his sister had immediately enlisted in the diplomatic corps. Determined to follow in her brother's footsteps, humanity was no longer just a primitive species tolerated by the Galactic Compact, because one man had proven that they had something to offer the galaxy that no other species could match, not telepathy or technology or ancient wisdom, but something simpler and perhaps more valuable: the ability to choose what was right regardless of the cost, to stand in shadows and wait for the dawn, and to protect those who had not earned protection.